Skeptics. What insane conspiracies do you actually believe in? That anti-dandruff shampoos temporarily get rid of dandruff, but somehow dry your scalp out even more over time, so that it worsens your dandruff when you stop using it. So I thought that I had dandruff for years and always used Head & Shoulders or other related dandruff shampoos, and nothing really worked. One day my friend says, "Are you sure you have dandruff and not just dry scalp?" I thought they were the same thing, so I did some Googling. Turns out if you have dry scalp, dandruff shampoos make it worse. Just to check, I stopped using dandruff shampoos and started doing things to treat dry scalp, and my, quote, dandruff went away, after like 20 years of me dealing with it. Yep, I could have just gone to a dermatologist, but then I wouldn't have been able to put this comment on the internet. Dandruff and dry scalp sufferers unite. For the few people asking what I did for the dry scalp, the biggest thing I did was brush my hair more often, which loosened up the flakes. After 2 decades of struggling with this is what fixed it, so you can imagine my irritated happiness. Since I do have really thick hair, using a hairdryer helps a lot versus air drying. I still have some problems with weather changes, but it's not an everyday issue like it was. I stay away from all medicated shampoos and tea tree oils now. Now let's find a way to fix my acne. I believe Area 51 was a base for building and testing new top-secret aircraft. When the government denied its obvious existence, it took on a lot of interest from the conspiracy theorist world. The US government now works to maintain the mystery around the base in order to maintain the focus of the conspiracy theorist community and distract them from the actual things going on elsewhere. I don't think many people would contend that Area 51 is just an Air Force base now, and the most secret thing that goes on there is testing prototype aircraft. It almost certainly benefits them that people attribute it to alien research, as it means they aren't looking harder at what they're actively working on, and thus, people can't develop counters to their new tools of warfare. Dr. Kelly, a WMD weapons expert, was murdered by the British government in 2003. I remember this happening. It was weird. The guy was demonized in most of the press for spreading misinformation, and then his self-deletion was all over the papers, and the next day a couple of reports of mysterious men in suits disappearing from the scene, and then those witnesses were hurriedly silenced. A very public inquiry was launched which ruled the death as a self-deletion, at the expense of an inquest. Afterwards, the medical records were sealed at the time, although the results of the inquest were later released in 2010. Medical experts have since requested whether he removed himself, and of course, we now know that he was right to question the 45-minute launch of WMDs in Iraq. I'm convinced in 50 years we'll discover he died for nothing, no one will care, but at the time, his death squashed any powerful voices claiming Blair was wrong to push ahead with the Iraq War. I think that aliens know we're here and potentially visit the Earth from time to time. Now, while there's definitely life on other planets, just think statistically about how many other planets there are, it's got to happen more than once, right? I did used to seriously doubt that aliens ever came here, it just doesn't make much sense. The main problem I saw is that there would be no logical motive for aliens to visit us, but not want any direct contact. That's like going to a party, but sneaking around the outside rather than going in. A while ago, however, someone else on the internet pointed out that there are tribes deep in the Amazon rainforest who've never contacted the outside world. In fact, it's actually illegal to visit them. They're being preserved and observed, but primarily preserved. What that guy on the internet was suggesting was that there may be some kind of advanced alien civilization who knows we're here, but avoiding direct contact in order to preserve us and our way of life. Sure, we're talking pretty unimaginable technologies here, but then, if you brought one of those Amazonian tribesmen out and told him that we can get to the moon and talk with anyone we want in the world, that would just blow his mind. In short, aliens know we're here, but they avoid contact in order to preserve us. That Harvey Milk's death was more than about his being gay. Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone were part of the more left-wing faction in San Francisco politics that wanted, among other things, to figure out a solution for the rent increases that were pricing long-time residents out of the city. Other members of the Board of Supervisors, like Dianne Feinstein, were quite liberal by national standards but were firmly in the pocket of real estate developers. When Dan White quit his post as a member of the board, it meant that they lost one of their most pro-business members, and since Moscone was going to get to appoint White's successor, they'd end up with someone who was really strong on the anti-gentrification side instead. Since the board was already closely split, this would represent a critical realignment in city politics. The real estate developers and the police association had meetings where they tried to offer Dan White various things if he'd try to get his old job back. There were former police officers who were among Dan White's strongest supporters. So he agreed, and Moscone appeared to be considering it initially, but Milk went to Moscone and jammed this idea up. After this, White shot Milk and Moscone. Dianne Feinstein replaced Moscone as mayor and used that position to appoint more moderates to the empty seats on the council. The chief of police, who was well liked by the gay community but roundly hated by his own rank and file, was fired. Dan White was given 7 years in jail for a double murder and served 5, and today a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco rents for $3,500 a month. There isn't enough evidence to really accuse anyone of anything, yet it's breathtaking how all of these big power players seemed to get what they wanted because of the actions of a lone nut. I'm a fan of the lost cosmonaut theory. The idea that the Russians were cutting a lot of corners to be the first in space, so Yuri Gagarin wasn't the first man in space, just the first to make it back alive. That the BBC brought on Chris Evans to host the new Top Gear knowing full well that everyone would hate him. Then, once they replaced him with someone better for the next season, people would compare the new host to Chris Evans and not Jeremy Clarkson, so people would like the new Top Gear more. This is similar to the new Coke conspiracy theory, the theory that Coca-Cola wanted to change from sugar to corn syrup to increase profits, but they knew that there was a slight taste difference that people would notice and reject. To hide this, they introduced an even more different formula, New Coke, and while it entered the market, they were able to flush the original sugar-based Coke from the pipeline. People rejected New Coke as they expected, which gave them the opportunity to, quote, listen to their customers and reintroduce Coke Classic, now made with corn syrup. Customers rejoiced at having their original flavor back, not noticing it was now slightly different than before. Coca-Cola also got a large amount of publicity out of all of this and helped cement affinity for the brand. Regardless of whether this is true, it is the kind of thing a megacorporation would do. However, I feel like there's bottles of old Coke left in the world, and if we wanted to prove it, we probably could have by now. Hot dogs are sold in packs of 12. Hot dog buns are sold in packs of 8. If you want enough hot dogs to go with buns, and vice versa, you have to buy 2 packs of hot dogs and 3 packs of buns. Otherwise, you're left with some useless leftovers. I'm on to you, hot dog mafia. And yeah, sure, different regions, brands, and different countries package them in different quantities. In various places, you might find them in packages of 5, 6, 8, 10, or 12, or any or all of those. Doesn't mean the entire world gets them packaged the same way. That Smash Bros. Conspiracy where they already have the characters they want for the new game picked out, but they let us vote to make us think we have some power. Women's pants don't have usable pockets, so they have to buy purses. I have a few female friends that buy men's skinny jeans just to have the pockets. That for the conspiracy theories proven to be true, MK Ultra comes to mind, we've likely only seen the tip of the iceberg. It's very possible that we shot down Flight 93. I was in the Air Force from 08 to 14 as a crew chef. During, I met multiple people that were stationed at Langley AFB in Washington, D.C. that said we definitely scrambled F-16s that day from the base, and some of them came back with less armament than they took off with. It's horrible to think that we'd do this, but it does make sense. 2 planes have hit the towers, 1 on the Pentagon, and now that you get a plane that's not responding to any callbacks, what do you do? Again, it's horrible, but in my opinion, that plane has got to come down. If all this is true though, the skeptic in me is surprised at the length at which the government has gone with the stories of cell phone calls, heroics, the movie, and other things. And yeah, I understand Langley is not geographically located in DC, but given its vicinity and importance, the district is commonly used as its reference point. Langley is commonly referred to as the tip of the sphere, and most of the Air Force's central intelligence is based there. As I said, I am, for the most part, a skeptic of the possibility of this. This is what I believe the question called for, and I'm just saying that out of all of the conspiracies out there, this is one I'm not as quick to dismiss, due to personal references that I've encountered. While I do currently own tinfoil in my household, none of it is in any form of headgear. And I'd like to confirm I've had no run-ins with any secret government agencies as of yet. I'll keep you posted. My current level of concern may rise given how this Trump thing plays out. Lip balm temporarily makes your lips feel moisturized and soft, but dries out your lips over time, so you end up buying more. Keep hydrated, everyone. It's a great way to prevent chapped lips. 2 liters a day is the recommended amount, but varies based on age, weight, activity levels, and other things. That Michael Jordan was suspended by the NBA for gambling, and they covered it up as his baseball era. The NBA had too much to lose from tarnishing Jordan's name. The RNG in XCOM is rigged. I know they're rookies, but what the frick was the chance of missing 4 60% shots in a row? I bet my left testy that any shot where the chance is displayed as 85% may as well be 10%. I don't care what you say, you can't convince me otherwise. And don't get me started on the dodge bullcrap, like the game needed more ways to make me want to punch a puppy. Guys, I don't want to sound like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat or anything, but I think O.J. Simpson killed those people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to think that all prisons were filled with sociopaths and murderers, until I started interning at one and seeing it from the inside. There's definitely something shady going on with corporations and the free labor. I'm totally convinced our criminal justice system was designed to keep slavery around. Call me paranoid, but I'm a subscriber to the idea that we're being spied on. At any moment, the NSA can tap into my camera and microphone on my phone and observe me. Not that they'd want to observe me, but I think they can do it to anyone. I don't know if this is as much a conspiracy theory as much as an unspoken fact of life these days. I mean, we know that we're being spied on all the time, and our data is being used to inform corporations, as seen in our targeted ads and such on social media. If you do want to go further than that, though, most of the people the narrator knows who work in IT do put tape over their webcams, and they are much more informed about this sort of thing than we are. Honestly, I'm normally not one for these, but I can't help but believe, when faced with the overwhelming evidence, that King of the Hill was cancelled due to Dale's theories being uncomfortably close to the truth. I don't necessarily trust our 2 cats. When I walk into the room, they look at me, separate, and go their own ways. Technology breaking just after its warranty expires isn't a conspiracy. We're told to design it that way. You put heat-generating components near heat-sensitive components so they degrade and break. The trick is to design them close enough to break, but far away enough to not break too soon. This is something that I've immersed myself in over the past 5 years of my life. I consider myself a skeptic, and consider the average conspiracy theorist to be the foremost discreditor of legitimate conspiracy theories. I've come to realize that at the source of so many wild conspiracy theories, there lies a grain of truth, which was drowned out by rampant speculation and paranoia. You have to understand that wherever conspiracy theories are discussed, the mentally ill and the paranoid will flock there like moths to a flame. They drown out any rational discussion. And some of these things you can't mention without triggering that automatic reaction of, oh, you're one of those people. At that point, people stop listening to you with an open mind. Any conspiracy theorist worth his salt knows to avoid certain trigger words. If you want some real conspiracies, they're surprisingly out in the open. The MK Ultra sub-projects sound like a paranoid fantasy, but I'd be happy to share thousands of FOIA documents on the subject. Massive, elite rings of people doing illicit activities, often involving inappropriate behavior with minors, that are a reality as well. Just look at the recent investigations in the UK surrounding the Westminster Ring, or the Detroit affair in Belgium. Hell, look at Jeffrey E.'s Island, which was set up for blackmail based on the bedroom activities of elites. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, search for a US Customs report on a cult called The Finders, and the subsequent news reports. I find that it's sometimes better to simply give someone a lead and let them come to their own conclusions. Have you ever heard of Adnan Khashoggi? Once you start searching names like his, it's hard to deny that there's a class of protected criminals operating on a supranational level. The conclusion I've come to is that real conspiracies are incredibly convoluted and, above all, boring. To have a good foundation, you have to investigate a few major scandals and how they overlap. Iran-Contra, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and the savings and loan scandal. I could include a few others as well, but investigating those scandals will familiarize you with the major players. Once you do that, then you start seeing these obscure criminals and power players in other places that you wouldn't expect to. That's when crap starts to get weird and most people become confused, overwhelmed, and paranoid. Then they become the very people who can only ramble on and on incoherently, unable to explain what they know, and ironically discrediting the very conspiracies that they sought to expose. What happens after a certain point is that the plethora of front companies and power players gets jumbled up in your mind. You can't adequately articulate it or envision the exact structure, so unless you're willing to actually map those things out with a character web, then you just wind up passing on little tidbits of information without context. So as information passes from researcher to researcher, it gets more confusing, and there are less references and evidence offered. This leads newcomers to believe that there isn't actually any proof, but in reality it's just because it's one of the most difficult topics to articulate, especially the deeper you go. Some people do actually map out the connections, and the one guy who came closest to naming the usual suspects was an artist named Mark Lombardi. I highly recommend checking out his Wikipedia page. He wound up self-deleting, after painstakingly mapping out connections that would become relevant in later scandals. And it's no wonder, because this stuff takes a psychological toll. After a certain point, most researchers simply decide, I can't do this anymore. I know something evil is going on, but for my mental health, I need to step back. I'll tell you one thing, it's an alienating and surreal feeling to be armed with this knowledge. I remember back when the Panama Papers story broke and we learned that Mossack was the son of a former Third Reich official who wound up working for the CIA in Cuba. I thought to myself, yeah, this fits the bill. I bet Adnan Khashoggi and Farhad Azima will turn up in there somewhere. And sure enough, subsequent news reports showed that Khashoggi and Azima were implicated. Now, how is it that I, a humble Google armchair warrior, can see all of this going on, but it still remains beneath the surface? Conspiracies suppress themselves at this point. It's much easier to laugh at them than sift through all of the paranoia and convoluted nonsense. Much easier not to put yourself through the living hell that Mark Lombardi did. Much easier to take the safer road and not be perceived as one of those people. Why do I have to anonymously write into a YouTube channel to even mention these things that are easily verifiable with mainstream media reports? I have to lead a virtual double life because my friends and family would view me differently if they knew the things that I believed. It doesn't matter that I could prove it to them with sources that they deemed credible. They just wouldn't give me the time and willingness. In short, many horrific conspiracies are real, but they automatically suppress themselves. No shills required. I wonder if just narrating these is going to set off a chain of events that turns the narrator into the kind of person who researches these things exhaustively in his own time. I'm not saying that I'm convinced one way or the other, just that when people swear the evidence is there, it's almost a challenge for me to look them up myself. If it makes a difference to you, dear viewers, the narrator would like to present the material here just as an overview of these theories, rather than come off as a proponent of any of them. There is absolutely no reason for contact cases to be as large as they are, except to increase the amount of saline solution needed to cover up your contact lenses. Big saline companies are out to get us. Far more advanced technology is available, but for the sake of certain companies' profits, we don't get certain technologies. For example, we had a prototype electric car capable of a 250-mile range back in 1914. You're telling me 66 years later and it's not a normal part of society? The dependency on oil is stifling our advancements as a society. Greed is holding us back. Beyoncé was never really pregnant with Blue Ivy in 2011. Beyoncé is highly controlling of her public image and is more than capable of pulling this off. Beyoncé's pregnant belly inflated and deflated throughout her pregnancy. In one interview, her pregnant belly appears to collapse. In interviews, she'd mess up and say inconsistent due dates, not messing up by a few days but by months. Despite being one of the most talked about celebrity pregnancies, there's no leaked information about the birth. During the birth, we know Beyoncé and Jay-Z sectioned off an entire wing of Lenox Hill Hospital. I can see wanting some privacy, but what were they hiding that they had to shut off a whole wing? The theory is that Beyoncé's career is highly dependent on her body and keeping it tight. Or they might have fertility issues. B&J paid a surrogate to carry their baby, then shut down a whole wing of the hospital so no one would know Beyoncé never gave birth and wouldn't see the surrogate. No photos were released of Bey shortly after the pregnancy because people would have been able to tell she hadn't just been pregnant. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was a key part of Clinton's 2008 campaign. Tim Kaine was the chairman of the DNC before Schultz. Clinton offered Kaine the position of vice president if he stepped down and recommended Schultz as his replacement. He stepped down. Schultz became the chairman of the DNC after a short period. She proceeded to do everything in her power to rig the elections so that Clinton got the nomination. Clinton's VP nominee is Tim Kaine. Soccer will never be popular in America because the broadcasters have no desire to create demand for it. It's essentially 45 minutes of commercial-free programming. Who wants that? Success of football and baseball is directly linked to their built-in ability to have breaks for commercials. Air those games all the time. The advertisers have chosen America's interest, and it's impossible to change without broadcast support. Similar to why no one wants to promote hockey in America, because it doesn't really lend itself to broadcast advertising. I believe the government created Throwback Thursday so they could get all of our old pictures on their databases. Mainstream media only reports things for ratings, while they pass up on actual world news that could affect us, and they intentionally misinform people to make the situation and public outcry worse. This is kind of answering the opposite question, but I feel the need to share. There are people who are proponents of the September 11th buildings being brought down by controlled demolition, saying that the videos look the same as one. I think they're looking at it the wrong way. Why does controlled demolition look the way it does? Because engineers plan explosives to take advantage of the building's natural weak points. If a large building was to actually fall on its own, it would look the same because they both fail at the same weak points. There are so many conspiracies about that, but I've never seen one actually address that issue. It's not that the buildings look like controlled demolition, but that controlled demolition looks like an actual building collapse. We just haven't had any other skyscrapers fall naturally to compare. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.